Right, let's kick off to our board talks. Welcome everyone. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai and hoki mai to board talks. We deliver these every 2 months. They're free for our community sector and they're all topics about governance and to get us really thinking about what we can do in our not-for-profit board roles. We've got a fantastic panel with us today, but before we introduce them to you, I'd just like to thank the community governance team behind the scenes. We have April and Tuba, and for many of you who've joined us throughout the year. So board talks, we've had over 2,000 have registered for board talks this year. And just for a little bit of context, our top talk was charities talk, changes for our charities with over 700 or so registrations, so that was a big response. We've had lots of different topics for board talks throughout the couple of years, and all of our talks are available on the website communitygovernance.org.nz. You can also listen in on Spotify and enjoy some of the great conversations that we've had. Thank you to our community who've joined us, and if you would love to hear from you, so if you'd like, you could put in your name and what organisation you're from. If you've managed to see me in real life, also do a shout out. It's lovely to meet people when I've been out and about as well. So thank you again for joining us. Kia ora, Carolyn. And we've got Veronica. If you feel like putting it in there, and also what are you up to this weekend, because for some of us it is a stunning weekend and very, very hot, so I hope you're all enjoying yourselves and getting ready for the wind down into Christmas. So I'm just going to introduce our panel guests with us, because this talk about climate change, community resilience, it is really designed to provide a bit of thought leadership. What can we do? Have we thought about? But also it was in response to the climate, the Cyclone Gabrielle and the really big, like the environmental floods that we've had and real big impacts in our communities, and thinking, what have we learnt things? Have we come up with different ways of working, and just really exploring some of the things that we might need to consider in our board roles. Oh, kia ora, Angela from Dunedin, International Science. Nice, and Charmaine, Tamaki Waste. Nice. So there's a bit of housekeeping. It's just keep yourself on mute, please. And if there's a bit of background noise, sometimes it does happen, we will mute you. And but feel free to use the chat function and to ask any questions that you might like to ask. And if you want any resources, things like that, we've got some great resources that we're going to share as we go. For those of you that have joined us before, you'll know that this is a great opportunity to ask those questions and to really try and engage with our panel guests as well, and to get all the things that you want to ask. So don't be shy. It's very informal board talks, and again, it's brought to you by, we've had a wonderful sponsor this year, which has been Cat Herder. Righty ho, so we'll bring our panel guests up. And so we have with us is Georgina and Florence, and I'm going to ask them each to just introduce themselves. Tell us a bit about you. Florence, would you like to begin?
Sure. Haere takamua, takamuri, ko iwhai, tina koutou katoa, ko whangamoa te maunga, ko mahitei te awa, ko aorere te moana, ko Florence tōkuingoa, tina te mihi mahana kia koutou, tina koutou, tina koutou, tina koutou katoa. Kia ora te whānau, my name is Florence. I'm the Global Sustainability Lead at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. My focus is supporting New Zealand exporters and their sustainability strategies, and also looking at New Zealand's role from a sustainability perspective in trade on the world stage. I also wear a couple of other hats. I'm the co-founder of Cheer Sisters and a functional health beverage company, and sit on that board. And I'm also a trustee of charity Businesses for Climate Action. So hopefully I'll be able to use examples from all three of those roles in our kōrero today. Over to you, Georgina.
Kia ora koutou, ko Georgina Morrison toku ingoa nā pahi atua aho. So I'm the Executive Officer for Environment Hubs Aotearoa. So we connect regional hubs throughout the country who are environment centres and hubs. We have 21 from Kaitaia down to Riverton, and they do connection with their communities, advocacy, specialist advice, sustainability, warm, safe housing, food security, waste. They do it all, restoration, and I have another couple of hats as well. So I chair Eastern and Central Community Trust, which is on the eastern part of the North Island. So we go from Tairāwhiti down to Featherston and Horowhenua and Manawatu on the other side of the ranges. And I have some other philanthropic hats as well. What a beautiful community. Lovely to see who's there in the chat. So hopefully look forward to engaging with you a little bit more throughout the workshop today. Kia ora.
Right, yes, so Board Talks is designed to raise thought leadership and all those things, governance, and also our sector is, we've got over 115,000 not-for-profits in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but we also in the not-for-profit space, we do a lot. So when I share that, we're not just sitting back with governance and separation of management, we're often doing both dual roles. So sometimes it is a lot of heavy lifting, we have to really dig in. Just for some context, this year we did a state of the survey, and we also asked our chairs of not-for-profits how they contribute, and many of them have said that they often have to dig into their own pockets to support kaupapa. So it's really important for us. We are not very passive in our governing roles. We're often doing a lot. So I think today's talk will be really interesting to get into how we can think about governance in future and protecting our assets, our community, ourselves, and down to practical kind of ideas about how we can implement those. So yeah, it's a bit of context. Kia ora, Gillian. She's over in Gisborne, where my whānau's from, so welcome. So we're going to kick off with the first question, and these are just, remember, don't stress out panelists. It's just a really good conversation. We've got lovely people with us. Hopefully they can ask you some tricky questions though, because you're both very experienced. But when we do engage with, with climate change and community resilience, when are the conversations like these coming up? Are we really proactive? Have you seen any kind of ideas that you have seen out there relating to conversations at the board table? I'd like to start.
I can kick off on this one. I think that we're probably not seeing it enough as much as we should be. There are, some that are starting to do impact reports and stuff like that. But, I think all too often, if you're not in that sector, you might think, oh, climate change, that's not really impacting me. But it's not until you think about your broader stakeholders, of your not-for-profit, might be the community, suppliers and employees, and start thinking about those broader impacts of climate change as well, that you start realizing that it's impacting everyone in so many facets of their lives. That might be anything from, the cost of insurance to severe weather events. Rose touched on Cyclone Gabrielle, to increasing gas and oil prices, impacting costs of flights, other transport. And the key is to be thinking really broadly about these impacts and how they might be impacting your organisation for the worse or for the better.
Yeah, nice. And shall we explore that a little bit more around climate change? Because maybe it's terminology wording. It's also a little bit about sustainability for those of us who've been in sustainability roles. It's all encompassing, isn't it? So it means everything. Climate change has been spoken about. There's a huge amount of interest, but if we apply it to practical sense, what are some of those? How would you determine climate change in a governing sense?
Maybe if I could, and I'll agree with Florence, I think we have been quite reactive in the past, so it's not until it affects our supply chain and what's happening around us that we've really thought about it. We do have some good examples of some quite proactive organisations who are starting to think, how is this going to affect us? There was a really nice example in Hamilton I think it was earlier this year, where there was, I think, around 40 plus organisations who got together and looked at, let's say it was going to be a climate change event, how they could be quite proactive in thinking about all the ways that that they work. And I'm not sure if someone on the call might have been part of that, but they did think about if an event happened, how they would all work together. And I think opportunities like that can help organisations you know, in their planning and look at what they're currently doing. But also I think it's a good idea to be quite proactive, and we are seeing more organisations do that. And sometimes that's because they might need to incorporate that into their reporting. But there's some great organisations thinking about every step of their organisation and bringing in, you know, resilience and climate change, especially not just themselves, but yeah, suppliers and who they're working with, the other organisations they support in their communities. So I think it's a mix between that proactive and reactive. And it's great to see that we are getting slightly more proactive as there's conversations like this. So really great that we're having this conversation today, Rose, so we can try and encourage people. And I think later on we're talking about tools, and sometimes it's, yeah, just knowing where to start is quite helpful too.
And maybe if I'll just build on something that Georgina mentioned, you know, it's really important to just be thinking as broadly as possible. And it's sometimes easier to think about the physical risks, you know, back to Cyclone Gabrielle, we all saw the impact there, but there's also these transition risks. So regulatory changes or what your community expects from you in this space. These types of things are changing as well, as long as with, you know, just being prepared for a severe weather event.
Yeah, I think if we thinking about what you're saying about the physical impacts, and then it is around the impact it has on each other, especially when we're serving in our board roles, and we often hold many roles, like we might be on one organisation and we're in another and we're on several. So we're helping in many different capacities, or we might be the chair. And we saw a lot of that, especially in the region, Georgina, that you're chair of ECCT, so Eastern Central, is a lot of the chairs in the EV space were coming together and holding a lot on marae and having to do a real heavy load and being key contacts. So that was really top of my mind about what have we learnt through that time about the impact on the workload. Some people, they might be the chair of an organisation, but then they're equally affected personally. So whilst we're in the midst of a bit of a crisis happening, have we learnt any really key things that we can take away about how do we be really proactive, so that if events like this and happen again, we can be really strongly responsive about who we work with, like stakeholders, partners. Yeah. Have you seen anything in particular that you'd like to share as a good example of kind of moving post out of the cyclone recovery?
Maybe if I could share something that's happening in Auckland. Councils are very different throughout the country, and I think those councils who have been through the impacts of some of the climate change weather events that we're seeing, Auckland, Tairāwhiti, are probably moving a little bit quicker. But Auckland has put some funding into facilitators to work with their community to come up with community plans. And that's really great to see. It is that proactiveness that we've just been talking about. And just thinking about what you were saying in terms of, you know, iwi and hapu groups were amazing. In fact, you know, they were the standout heroes after the cyclone. Really working with your local council, if you're in the not-for-profit space and you will be doing any work, it's really good to try and get some agreements beforehand in terms of funding. I know that there were some real issues with retrospective kind of funding for if you were holding on to a whole lot of stock and you use that in after the cyclone to support people, you might not be able to be reimbursed. So I think it's coming up with those community plans to make sure that any groups who are playing a role in response, that they'll be fairly recompensed afterwards and in a way that makes sense. So it's great to have those conversations, you know, as early as possible, because we know it's not an if, it's a when these events will happen again.
It's sometimes not even, it's sometimes not having understanding what else demands might be on us. So talking about a community plan or having a plan in place, that's just the best place to start, isn't it? So often I kind of liken climate change action in a governance space as just putting it on the agenda. So where we once had health and safety responsibilities, and that PCBU, it was really top of mind, and it was really critical for not-for-profits to get on and make sure that we're complying. Equally, we can kind of front foot this by considering what impacts might we need to think about. And touching on what Florence kind of said, it might not just be physical assets or it could be office space, it could be travel. We now have Zoom, so we can lessen that kind of impact of travel and cost, but it also could be investments that you might hold as a not-for-profit. Yeah, have you got some insights to that, Florence? Yeah,
I was just going to say, I think, one of the boards that I sit on, we were like, oh, where do we start on this? And just putting it on the monthly agenda, that was our board cycle for meeting, was the best place to start. And like you say, it's very similar to health and safety in that it's something new now, but it should become BAU. And assessing your monthly or quarterly or whatever your board cycle is, your climate risks and opportunities is the best way to start. And you might have not much to say at the start, but as soon as you get into that rhythm or cycle, you'll be surprised when you put on that climate lens how much comes up.
And what do you think, but moving into kind of the practical sense for those of us who we don't have big resource teams, and even thinking globally, like what have you seen potentially, Florence, about some key practical tools or solutions or ideas that we can start to think about? Because this isn't just 1 year, it's a really idea about having a long-term plan and all-encompassing. And if we probably prepare for it now, we're going to be better off, aren't we, to be prepared in likelihood of something happening or a response. Now, I just want to touch on something else that happened in the Cyclone Gabrielle, which kind of probably went under the radar, but it's something that's quite important too, is that afterwards there was lots of media wanting to capture stories in that community, especially from Māori communities and leaders. And I think there was a real pushback to make sure that people weren't taken advantage of in a crisis. And we need to kind of think about that, about vulnerability, and talk about resilience. But these can be devastating effects. And when you're in a crisis of that level, if the more that you've got some guidelines around how you engage with media, who's the spokesperson, is it your chairperson, is it your executive director, or just having a real think about the tension that can arise when you're under duress around being really organised, pays off in the long run, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There's lots there that I could speak to. I might start with that global context piece and just talk a little bit about what's happening, what I'm seeing from a business and trade perspective globally. And that is that the business community has realised the impact of climate change and accepted that it is a huge financial risk as well as a physical risk. And because of that, it started being incorporated across business and trade, and that ripples onto the not-for-profit sector as well. And what we're seeing starting in the UK and Europe, but also in New Zealand, is that governments are regulating on climate-related disclosures. And what that means is that listed companies need to publicly disclose their climate risks, their opportunities, how climate is incorporated into their strategy, how they go about climate governance. And that is happening in New Zealand, and it is now happening in 85% by value of the countries where New Zealand is exporting to. So UK, Europe, but also the likes of Thailand, Philippines, they all have this in the pipeline. So it's not enforced yet, but it's coming. Australia, parts of the US, although maybe not for much longer, who knows, Canada. And so all of these boards of listed companies in those countries are being required to not only think about this, but publicly report on that. And because of that, we've suddenly seen the standard of climate governance increase quite rapidly because it's no longer optional. And I think that that's something that this sector can lean into and learn from.
Yeah, I'm thinking we need a seat at the table, Florence, not
Totally.
the afterthought of like, we're equally, if not more important, because we are at the grassroots, flex roots, right in the community. So yeah,
Agree.
it can't be an afterthought. Equally, yeah, I think Georgina, have you got some experience with the climate action? I think it's a community trust, so they have released. They have a working group, or would you like to share a bit about that? Because I think it is applicable to, again, having a seat at the table in the governance space around if there's any policy or compliance changes, then we should ourselves as community governance should be able to provide what we see.
Yeah, so the combined community trusts throughout the country put together a climate action working group, because a lot of the community trusts do support climate and environmental activity. It's not enough. I think we probably all know that environmental funding has been minimal at best, and certainly needs to lift. What they wanted to do was to get together and share what they were doing and put some money into supporting national endeavours, and also support the governance practice of the different community trusts around the country. It's been really successful. I would say that, and actually in any governance team or staff team, I think you get real success when you delegate somebody to take this on and you give them that responsibility. So what we did is we contracted 2 climate leads, and they've been fantastic. We've got one in the North Island, one in the South Island. They've created some resources, which I think we're able to share. And they've really worked with each of the trusts in terms of how we were looking at this from a governance lens. So not just the grants that we were putting out into the community, although there's some great stuff happening there as well. And maybe I'll just quickly say that, you know, some of the community trusts are doing great work supporting their applicants to look at their climate footprint and actually supporting them to do that. Not all the community trusts are doing that, but there's a certain movement in that direction. So the Climate Action Working Group and the Climate Co-Leads have been supporting the community trusts as a whole to move into a better space with their sustainability journey. That's kind of twofold. So it's your organisation, but also we have large amounts of investments in New Zealand and throughout the world. So it's also looking at how we can move in the investment space. And I think, you know, there's some really interesting conversations around greenwashing, and Florence, I think you might have some perspective on that. But as we're all starting to move, it is important to be really critical when thinking about that. But I think it's been really successful. We have had other community trusts or other philanthropic groups sign up to that. There's a TICA change, and you know all of the other conditions that come with that the climate action commitment that we've made. And so it's been really supportive, and hopefully those resources might be helpful if anyone's interested in seeing how that's worked from that climate trust perspective.
Yeah, we've shared the links in the chat so people can have a look, but also we've got a question in there. So in not-for-profit organisations, health and wellbeing sector, what items would we have in our board papers on climate risk reports? I think Florence has popped some things in there, but would you like to speak to that, Florence?
Yeah, absolutely. So best practice, what your community and your key stakeholders will be looking for is actually the number one is board oversight, that the board is that climate is being discussed at a board level. And you know you can show that in your board papers, and like I said before, by just putting it on the agenda. What's really important underneath that is to have the right risk management processes in place. So basically the tools that you're using to identify and assess climate risks. And again, that could be the physical, like what happens if we have another Cyclone Gabrielle, you know, to Rose's point, who's going to be the media spokesperson, having all of that, the right processes in place for that, and also your transition risks. So regulatory changes, increase in cost of flights, increase in cost of insurance. The one there is disclosure. This is really important, and I can speak to this further later on the greenwashing point, because making this information transparent is really important, and some people shy away from that because they're nervous about saying the wrong thing because there's such a backlash with greenwashing. But being really transparent in how climate change or sustainability more broadly is coming into your strategy and, even your finances, things like that, is really important. And you can disclose that. So you could make a simple impact report. It doesn't need to be anything fancy, or you can pop that in your annual report or your financial report. If you're doing any reporting annually, it's a really good idea to start popping a sustainability section in it. The third one there is climate related targets and goals. So making sure you have some targets in place. Do you want to be, are you measuring your carbon emissions? And if so, how can you reduce them? And I think while we're talking a lot about the physical risks here, it's really important if you're preparing for a storm like Cyclone Gabrielle that you're also aware of your role in the climate crisis and understand what your carbon footprint is. There's some really easy tools online like Climate Action Toolbox that are free to use. April might pop that in the chat, where you can get a little bit of an understanding of what your carbon footprint might be, and then you can set some targets around how much you might want to reduce that. Again, making these publicly available in a sustainability report or in any other sort of reporting you're doing is a great idea. And the last one here is stakeholder engagement. So, like any key topic, engaging with your stakeholders so you can understand their perspectives on this. Might be suppliers, might be your community, it might be your employees. It's always interesting what comes up on this issue when you look at it from others' perspectives in your organisation.
Can I just add one? I was
Yeah.
just going to say reputational risk is important too. So it's really interesting. Sometimes I'll come across an organisation who isn't doing anything, and that can be quite surprising, I think, in 2024 with all the things that are happening around us. And obviously the opposite to risk is opportunity. And so often I will make purchasing decisions based on, what I see in terms of action in this space.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's always easy to think about things like climate and think, oh my gosh, where am I going to start? So such a terrible issue impacting the world, and it is. But equally, it's really important, and I would encourage you to do this in a board setting, to start with opportunities or start with risks, and then make everyone flip their mindset and think about the opposite, because there are opportunities like any massive change. Which is what we're going through. There are opportunities, but unless you consciously put your mind to think to them, they can slip by really easily.
Yeah, and I think it's great that you went through those, Florence. Appreciate it. I got a bit distracted. I was looking at Marie put a link in there on Climate Connect Aotearoa, so it looked like a fantastic resource in there. I have to check that out a bit more. But I just want to go back to B. So in that list, you have material impact disclosure. Now, if I looked at that, I think, what? Like what? Are we going back over it? So you're saying, could you just explain that one a little bit more around reporting? Because I like the idea about sustainability or impact reporting, but for our not-for-profits, what could we get some better language there, I think, for us?
Yes, absolutely. That is technical jargon, so thanks for calling.
Yeah, lost me a little bit.
Material impact disclosure basically just means the big stuff in climate change that will impact your organisation, and giving it some space in however you report it. That might be in a financial report or an annual report. It doesn't need to be a sustainability report. It might be a little section on your website, and you might be thinking, this has nothing to do with me, I'm in the health sector. But if you think broadly and you think to your key stakeholders, you will likely find that it will impact you. I was going to say now or in the future, but I also think, we used to talk about the impact that climate change would have on future generations, and it will, but the reality is it's impacting all of us and all of our organisations today. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a different lens to see that, but thinking about what those impacts are, the good and the bad, and then sharing the big ones, that's the disclosure part, just sharing it, is really important. It shows your community that you're thinking about this.
Yeah, and I think that isn't that the most important one is just to get it on the agenda, or especially in this time of year, and we're moving into, we might have completed our strategy or we're looking to next year and beyond. That's the time to raise it with our board conversations. How are we doing anything in this space? Do we need to? Sounds like with compliance and potentially even with funders looking at it, we could get a little bit better, or at least start to think about how this might impact our organisations and the wider sense. So thinking about our teams or contracts that we have, or
Definitely, like a lot of community grants now, or even, you know, if you're going to be a supplier for someone else, you're providing a service or a product to someone else, they might have a question on their supplier form, you know, what is your ESG, your environmental social governance plan, or what are you doing in this space? And if you haven't thought about it, you know, you're going to be leaving that blank, and that might be an opportunity lost.
I think that's a difficult one too, because if you're a kaupapa environment, that's fine because you're probably more thinking about it. But if you're not so much, then it does drop away, doesn't it? So it's potentially just when you're having a strategy planning sessions, just have at least consider it. And but I was going to go to you, Georgina, because I was thinking about your role as chair of ECCT as a community trust. So what, if anything, what did you take away from the big impact that happened in your rohe? Like, did you start to change the way that you might address climate change impacts, and some real significant weather events? Like, did you change anything in your board practice or as chair?
Yeah, I think we've got a few changes, possibly not as many as I'd like, because that's one of my, I'm very environmental in my day job, and so with the with the community trust, I'd love to make change, lots of changes overnight, but I've got a board, and that's the reality of boards, that you need to take everybody with you. Some changes that we did make, how we made grants. So it was really great to be able to reach out to the community and make grants in a better way, and actually more of a transformational granting system than we've previously done. So I think that was actually a really great outcome for us, that we could see what was possible when things needed to be done quite urgently. In terms of with our governance hats on, what I've really been thinking about is our investments. So for many not-for-profits, I think the most realistic thing you could think about is probably who you bank with might be a really good example. Asking your bank, what they're doing in this space, and actually then making a decision on who you're actually banking with. That can make actually a huge difference if we all tell our banks and anyone that we have procurement with, any contracts, any business, that we actually want to see things. So for us, that was investments. So it's actually starting to think, how can we do audits of our investments? And going back to the environmental social governance, ESG, that Florence is talking about, I really like to put a T on it, ESGT, and that's for Te Tiriti. So it's a really important part of a climate change response, actually, is thinking about tangata whenua and mana whenua wherever we're working in the country. And so for me, it's that challenge, and they are out there for investments, so slightly harder than probably just what your bank is doing. I think that's a bit easier, but that's been the real challenge for me as chair, is how we can try and learn more about our investments, maybe bring some more home and actually impact investment in our regions, etc. So we're kind of getting that win-win. And maybe we have started changing our thinking a little bit around what the investments are actually doing for us. If we are making money and it's affecting climate change, that weather events that are affecting our community, then that doesn't make any sense at all. So I think there have been some changes, and obviously we did sign up, as we said before, to that group action that the community community trusts are involved in. So I think it probably has sped up some things, but I would love us all to be a little bit more courageous and do things a little bit faster. But that's just a personal characteristic.
Yeah, nice. So we've got some comments just here. One from, might just read this from Marie. Around the material impact could be a community organisation impacted by climate change via flooding in relation to community building that they use or own, responsible to maintain. So that's exactly what I was kind of speaking to, is the tangible assets that you hold. Often a lot of our charities, organisations, not-for-profits, they do hold lots of assets. We do hold lots of buildings. We might lease buildings as well. So again, you might not think that your environment kaupapa organisation, but actually you've got lots of responsibilities under your hat that you're responsible for. So yeah, I wouldn't mind just moving us to more of a practical lens, because what you talked about, Georgina, is connecting to other groups as well that are leading into this space, and these organisations out there. And thanks again to Marie for sharing that Climate Connect Aotearoa. But in a practical sense, moving a board forward, so you've had big impacts, or you've seen other communities impacted. How do you start that conversation? Like, the challenge here is you might say climate change, and then 5 of your board members say, no way, like there's nothing about, it's not even real. I don't know. Is there any kind of the negative feedback that you might have come across, or the sense of like, this isn't something that we need to get into? So how do we handle those difficult conversations?
Yeah, happy to jump on that. So people will make decisions for various reasons, and you're always going to have the butterflies like me who will jump on good change in a heartbeat. I don't need much explanation. You've got your traditional people who are going to need a little bit more information, etc. If you have people on your board who are from that generation where climate change is still something you can question, then you don't need to call it climate change. There are so many opportunities, and that might be around, like Florence was saying, in terms of customer expectations. So it's important for organisations to realise that New Zealand is one of the most, in terms of countries around the world, one of the most populations, I think, with the strongest urge to do something around climate change. So actually they are looking, we know we've got those percentages there, they are looking to organisations and what they're doing. So you can help your board understand that this is something you actually need to do in terms of your viability. Sometimes it's about saving money, sometimes it's around buying local, because actually buying local is something really easy we can do. So we could look at our procurement policies and make sure that who we're working with are the right people to work with, that they're local. So there's other ways to get around it, because sometimes climate change can cause us to freeze and to not make decisions because it feels really hard. So just chunking things down. Florence was talking about those tools and that you're going to share today. Once you've got a kind of plan, I think, putting a timeline on it as well. So calling it whatever you need to call it to get it through some trustees, putting some timelines so you're holding yourselves accountable, starting small, but also being courageous. So going as far as you can with your board. But like I said, everyone's going to have those different triggers to help them make decisions. But everybody can move. It's just about those relationships and making sure that we're taking everyone with us.
I couldn't agree more with the relationships part. It's really bringing everyone on the journey, and sometimes that happens slowly rather than saying, oh my gosh, we've got to make all these changes at once, but bringing it into the kōrero is important if you haven't already. And to speak to Georgina's point around the reduced cost, I think I've got a fascinating example to bring to life, or a couple actually, from my role at Chair Sisters, which is a small beverage company. Again, you might think, well, what has that got to do with climate? But we decided that we were a business, we're having an impact on the environment, and we wanted to understand what that was and reduce it as much as possible. So in 2018, we measured our carbon emissions, and we found out, we do a small amount of exports. We mainly sell around New Zealand, but we found out that air freight of some of our products to Japan, it was just one pallet, which was a small amount, 1,500 bottles, and the purchaser had wanted them really quickly, and we didn't even know about this, but they just paid for them to be air freighted, and that turned out to be about 10% of our entire organization's carbon emissions for the year. So we made a really simple policy: no more air freighting our drinks. We just have to be a bit more organized, and it's way, way cheaper as well. So to Georgina's point, these impacts on the environment they cost a lot now, and they're going to cost more and more and more as their as the cost of the environment are embedded in with companies rather than just being extracted. So, you know, the cost of oil and gas, as the most simplistic example, is increasing. And so to be able to understand those costs and then reduce them, that is responding to climate change in itself.
Yeah, that's a great point, Florence, that you've picked up on is, yeah, I mean, now more than ever, we need to think about the costs to our organisations and having a really good look at our services, our delivery. How can we streamline it? Many of our not-for-profits are under a huge amount of financial strain or duress, and most equally under strain from, you know, end of the year. You can't move without everyone feeling a bit worn out and a bit over it this year. So many people seem to be hoping, cross fingers, for a better year in 2025. But it has been a long haul. You'll hear many people talk about that. I think that is moving into trying to think a bit more positively for all of us is the opportunities. And I was just reflecting on this year. We had our not-for-profit event held in Aotearoa, and we had a wonderful day. We had Dave Latelli, Rob Campbell, we had all these amazing people. But we also shared this video from Kevin Bigger, and I don't know if April can find a link to his website, but he's someone that rode across the transatlantic. He's someone I think I like listening to because he's very inspirational about his own personal journey, and I think we can take away from things like that. But his real message was to think bigger. So it's maybe the opposite of what we think. So everyone's very tired. It's been very stressful. There's a lot of demand. We've had lots of reduction in funding, job losses. We're all very aware of the situation that Aotearoa is in at the moment. So trying to shift our thinking into what can basically get us inspired a little bit, you know. And what I liked about Kevin's approach is he said, think bigger, like go bigger, think bolder, and that actually, I took a lot away from that personally, because I thought that is the right approach. When you start to think, oh, it's never ending, or it's just a bit of doom and gloom, it does get you out of that kind of funk that we can get into. So pushing ourselves a bit further in our planning and our strategy and our goals can really be quite inspiring. And I think this could be the place to do it too, is to, in the climate change piece, is to get a wider sense of who's out there and some fantastic resources. So I've reshared the one that was shared with the workshop. So thank you for sharing that. But yeah, to think bigger and to connect wider with our sector is really of value, because it means that you're not alone. There's wonderful people doing things that expand your thinking and what you're doing. But on a practical level, it means that we can actually have a look and reset about what are we investing in, what are we using our time for, and streamline a lot. So if we take that kind of approach of what you've shared too, Florence, about the financial implications as well, can have some real benefits. So that was a long-winded little bit of a chat about moving into more of this resilience space. So how do we build that resilience? Can be applied against lots of different things, can it? But you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned, and Georgina, you mentioned as well, around collaboration. And I was thinking about that in terms of, you know, if you have issues taking others in your organization or on your board on the journey, is lean in to other organizations in your local community that are taking action on this, and see if there's something small that you can do to learn from them or collaborate with them. Because, you know, our not-for-profit sector is so important for our community's social capital, and, you know, networks of relationships of people who live and work locally that can really enhance community resilience in a crisis. And those strong social ties, you know, at the end of the day, will be what enables us to better prepare for and respond to the likes of, you know, another Cyclone Gabrielle. So I think that collaboration piece is a really important one. One other point that I was thinking of is the importance of thinking long term and the impacts of climate change. We're not seeing them all today, but sometimes we think, oh my gosh, they're so far in the future. But recently I was at an Institute of Directors breakfast where Rod Carr was speaking, the head of the Climate Change Commission, and he reminded us that we talk about 1.5 degrees global warming, that we're not on track to meet that, but it doesn't seem that high to some people who think, oh, 1.5 degrees, I'm in Porniki, Wellington, that would be pretty nice actually. But climate change doesn't show up on averages. And the point that he made is that by 2050, we're on track to have 50 days a year over 40 degrees in Sydney and 50 days a year over 50 degrees in Dubai. And those, that's sort of the point where there's technological breakdowns. It's pretty significant. So collaboration and thinking long term about how climate change might show up, which isn't on averages.
This is kind of on resilience, Rose. I'm probably cheating a little bit of expanding on Florence's point, but I think as much as there is the doom and gloom, we can have fun with this as well. So and getting, encouraging staff to do things like there's the bike challenge in February, for example, and making things fun. You could have like submission workshops where you invite other not-for-profit groups or community groups to do because submissions and democracy is actually a really important part of climate change action. So getting food, getting people together, a bit of music, doing a submission, or like the biking challenges just maybe within your own work. I'm not lucky enough to have a staff that work with me in Aotearoa because it's in the middle of nowhere. But if I did, I would 100% be asking them to bike to work and making it fun, frocks on bikes, that kind of stuff. So there is opportunities within this to not be super doom and gloom, but actually, enjoy some of those opportunities, go to markets and think about even like Christmas gifts at this time of year, buying local, doing something sustainable, events, not things. So it is doom and gloom because we're in a really tight position as humanity, but there are some things that we can do to encourage that wellness within our team, and that actually helps build that resilience as well if we're working together and we can see there's positive solutions. So actually even just putting some of these plans in place is something that you can do to look after your staff and make them feel like they are actually doing something. So from a wellness point of view, and health and safety, that's probably a really good idea to actually make sure you are doing this, because everybody knows there's climate change, and giving them something positive is a real great action to do.
Absolutely. We really found at Cheer Sisters that when we started prioritising sustainability, we encouraged our team to get involved in that and what it might look like, and that led to so many great outcomes. We do the bike challenge that I just popped into the chat there. We all get on board, everyone's sharing on the WhatsApp, how many kilometres they bike to work. And a lot of people are really scared on this. So giving them, especially younger people, an option to take action through their work or their volunteer work is a positive for your employee engagement.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic little takeaways, isn't it? Is to do some practical support for our teams and our management, and we need to work closer together. And like I shared early on, is that we do work very closely in our not-for-profit space. If not, we take on a huge amount of responsibility. So I think championing those things of practical ideas like the biking, kai, food, and having a bit of fun, but we've got a plan for it for success, don't we? So how do we get involved in the policies and submissions, keeping, in our community governance, we have a monthly pānui that we share out and we say what's on. So even just knowing that submissions are there or opportunities, we like to push out lots of different content from all different places to share. But it's a really good point that you mentioned, Georgina, around democracy and submissions, and taking opportunity to collaborate a lot more is critical. And Florence has touched on this quite a bit about the stakeholder relationships, partnerships. So They are the most important piece, and it's not just your funders though, it's not just sponsors and those, it's your community, it's your membership. Thinking about your environment hubs, Georgina, you would have branch networks and different things like that. So how do you get that across the agenda for everybody? Like thinking not just in an operational sense, but do you get a sense of direction from your chair or from the board in the overarching entity?
Yeah, look, I guess climate change is everything that we think about with Environment Hub. So we have it pretty easy in terms of ensuring that trustees are with us. Sometimes it's actually about making sure that we're not doing too much actually in the environment space. And some of your not-for-profit attendees will know this. It's actually trying to focus on what we can do and, you know, not trying to feel that overwhelming burden of all the things that we have to do. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question. It's probably almost the opposite of having to be, and I know, you know, everything's about fun as well, but also making sure that we're being really careful in looking after our volunteers and our staff and everybody involved in that process, so that it is resilient change, etc. And often I think with our hubs around the country, they're small and large, but they're probably the tip of the iceberg, because what they're feeling is all of that community direction. And some of those links I just put into the chat shows that there are so many people in New Zealand that are concerned about this, and they want people to be giving them direction and positive solutions. So that's what our environment hubs enjoy. They enjoy being able to provide that space for people to come together and do something positive in their sustainability journey for their towns or regions, or even just individuals.
Yeah, I kind of raise about your thinking about incorporated societies and branches, and there's a lot of big focus on changes coming and occurring and re-registering. There's some great links out there for those of us who are sitting in incorporated societies or part of branches, but it is around possibly the direction of travel that we're going, and undertaking any governance change, whether it's a framework, whether it's thinking about different ways of governance models or Indigenous governance leans. It takes time, so we can't just all think that this is going to happen overnight, because it doesn't. So trying to take your board with you or trying to champion it, it's a worthy cause, and it's one that needs to happen. If we're not thinking about it, we should. But I think having a plan for a much longer time frame, rather than we're going to talk about it once and it drops off, like really working with the management team. You're lucky to have a big team, or like getting everyone on board and having workshops and discussions is probably a good place to start, I think, so that you can understand what your responsibilities are and then work on what you can do in time frames.
It is really important to have it as part of your strategic plan. And as Florence said, it's about thinking quite long. You know, how long is your strategic plan? It's interesting, in our Pākehā world, we set quite small timeframes. But actually really having to think about those really long-term views if you want to be around for a very long time, you know, putting sustainability and climate change into those strategic plans so that they are there. But I love getting them into all sorts of policies. And like you say, that is the benefit of having a network. We share a lot of our policy documents, etc. And so hopefully your not-for-profits are linked up with other groups like that. And we've got, you know, you've got lots of resources, Community Governance Aotearoa, there's lots of other networked groups. So you should be able to find somebody else with those great new policies that actually embrace the opportunities. But you're definitely getting into that structure of your organisation, as well as doing all the fun stuff day to day as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking you might have something to add, Florence.
Yes, I'm just thinking about, you know, taking your board on that journey and how important, like I like to call it the weave, like it doesn't need to just show up in one spot. Sometimes the best way is to think, you know, to Georgina's point, how does it impact finance? Or is this in your code of conduct? Or, you know, is it in your fundraising documents? Is it in your supplier documents? Is there a question on it when you're interviewing employees or volunteers? And so just having it show up in little spots can make embedding climate change or sustainability into your organization a lot stronger, because the people that are responsible for it are across the organization rather than just being one champion on your board, for example.
Yeah, and why I kind of mentioned about getting everyone together and having a workshop, having the kōrero and the discussion, it's really important, because we have to take everyone on board with us about the direction of travel and include everyone's perspectives and experiences, and that forms a much stronger plan, doesn't it, and focus moving forward. And then all the other things about the compliance, the submissions, and those are all the other add-ons to move forward with. Just we've got a couple of minutes, but I'm just going to put in a link to a gratitude journal that I often give away as a gift, and to some of our wonderful community that have supported us over the year. And all of our panel guests get lovely gifts, but this is one. Also, if you're looking out for a resource to give, also to help yourself as we move into 2025, it's a nice wellbeing journal. So thank you. So we've got any last takeaways about just any wellbeing tips that we've got? We talk about resilience, and we didn't quite get into resilience a huge amount, but I think resilience, just have to Google it. It is probably a little bit about moving out of crisis into real good positive actions that we can. And I think this is the time to do it. If you can, please take some time out to focus on what you'd like to focus on for 2025, what you can achieve, but within our means, capacity. So any last thoughts you'd like to share on?
I think taking some time out, when you're working on what you're passionate about, it's so easy to work all day, all night, and have that as your real sense of drive. But that doesn't mean it's not important to take a break, because to keep your enthusiasm up, you need that headspace. And sometimes that's when the best thoughts might pop up, is when you're truly able to switch off. So I think, being December, it's a good time to start slowing down, start thinking to yourself, what could I put on my list for 2025, and what has to happen before Christmas.
Yeah, lovely. I totally agree. Get out into nature, because there's scientific health benefits of that, but also it's a good way to turn off and let all these things percolate. I think popping things in the calendar for yourself or for your organization ahead of time, 3 months, just as a reminder, hey, I want to do something in this, and being courageous, because we need to. And yeah, following really neat people on, LinkedIn or whatever it is, because it's great to always get, if you find that positive person who's always got great ideas, etc., that helps you, helps the momentum and keeps you going.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, just around connecting back with nature, and I think that's really helps our well-being, doesn't it? And I'll tell you what, where I am, it is stinking hot, so it's very good, but I'm not complaining. And I hope everyone out there today who's joined us is also enjoying great weather and staying safe. Just as we wrap this year, this is the last board talk for 2024. We've got some great content coming up in 2025, so we'll be releasing the topics soon, but they're actually coming from our State of the Sector survey that we did this year in July. So we had about 158 people give us some fantastic feedback in that. And I'm just going to, because I've got a couple of minutes, I'm just going to share some of the top 5 or 6 topics that our community said that they want to see for 2025. Some is around board member development, so developing board members, young board members, and recruitment and induction. So that is super, super strongly coming through. Lots of people are talking about how to bring on new board members, induction process, things like that. Our second highest response was around governance and management. So that's very common for our community sector. So we often often say we are not passive. We've got to be really proactive in our space, because we're really quite time poor. And I'm just going to share a little bit of this is a recent opinion piece that I wrote as part of our pānui. You might find that of interest. It's around some of the leadership discussions we had with Rob Campbell, Dave Latelli, and around really thinking thinking big, yeah. Some other topics I'm just going to share with you. I'm just having a look. So governance and management, finances and fundraising. I'm pretty sure everyone will agree that's very critical in this environment. And we had also around legal policy updates, so incorporated societies, charities, changes and things like that. Collaboration and partnerships, which we have discussed in this space, because I think obviously in Te Tairao, like you can't do this alone. We shouldn't be doing it alone. We've got to really work hard with those around us. And I think that was coming through quite strongly. And then our last one was technology and innovation. So those were some of the requests that we've had for Board Talks 25. If you've got any ideas or suggestions or you'd like to join us, please send us email. We'd love to hear from you. So that's us, folks, for 2024. It's been a big year. Over 2,000 people have signed up for Board Talks. So thank you for joining us. If you're new, please come back, send us any articles and things. I'd love to keep in touch. I just want to say thank you to Florence and Georgina sharing the insights knowledge with us, and connect with them on LinkedIn or reach out to the team. Thanks again to April and Tuba. And to everyone here, take care. Mā te wā, stay safe. Ngā mihi.
Ngā te wā, ngā mihi.